My name is Tony Frazier, and I am a director filmmaker, grad student at Wayne State University, focusing on film. And I am a professor lecturer at University of Michigan for hip hop history, I like to say. And I own a dance studio in the Jackson area, mom of two, and activist.
Hi, I'm Anita Gonzalez, and I'm a professor of theater and drama and an associate dean here in SMTD. And I've also started the Global Theater and Ethnic Studies minor at the school. And in the real world, I'm a director and playwright.
And my name is David Jackson. I'm professor of music, specifically trombone here at SMTD. And I'm trying constantly to bring new works to the trombone world.
So we've been asked to talk a little bit about our work as it relates to racial justice. And I want to start off by asking my colleagues here. I've been thinking that my approach is always to think about storytelling and which stories are being told and which stories are not being told. So I try to pursue that work as a teacher and as a writer and as a deviser and director. I think it's very important in racial justice for people to understand stories that are not generally circulated by the mainstream media or by our professions and institutions within the performing arts.
Should I go next?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, no, go ahead, Tony.
Oh, I was going to say the same. I think I'm a storyteller by nature, and activist by nature. It's just in me. So my approach to my work is pretty much the same. It's storytelling and also, sharing stories that people may not hear or experience personally. But if people could be, allies, or if I could help, bridge the gap, I do that through storytelling. And I just believe that same, as Anita, we need to go beyond maybe the surface of things and search in depth for, search in depth for answers when it comes to racial injustice. When we're talking about social justice, we're talking about discrimination. And I like to say when we're talking about the experience of melanated people, Black African-American people in this country. So I like to figure out ways to bridge the gap and through storytelling, bring together communities of people, allies, and therefore to educate them through film and dance.
So for me, activism has not been a part of my background. I've primarily been a performer and a teacher, but through my performing and teaching, I've always been exploring projects that do bring about some amount of storytelling, I suppose, and to bring about certainly a Black perspective in terms of the pieces that I try to commission and the projects that I try to create. And I think probably I'm doing more of that now than I have ever done in the past, which I'm thoroughly enjoying.
I think there's a role also for advocacy. I find that I advocate for better storytelling and more diverse storytelling by working with national organizations like the Dramatists Guild and other places where I want to see an impact that happens on a national level for people really working towards inclusion of ideas and stories. So advocacy, I think we often think of advocacy as being in the streets and protesting, but I see advocacy happening when we agree to give our time and effort to organizations and to students and to mentorship. All of those are different kinds of ongoing advocacy that I think all of us do as teachers and as artists.
Yeah, I think it's really important to find spaces where you feel your strengths are. I think some people do feel that maybe protesting in the streets, is their strength, or being a mentor. I know at the University of Michigan in the dance department, there are a lot of students who feel they want to be a part of the cause when it comes to Black Lives Now, with things having escalated. And so I have definitely been in connection with those students, trying to help them figure out their path, as well as continuing to figure out, my own. I feel my strengths are in advocacy. I feel my strengths are film and dance. That's where I feel like my strengths lie, and my voice is strong, and I feel rooted in that. So I think it's important to share that with the next generation so that they can find their way. I think sometimes we also think about change being like this big scale and making a difference, and sometimes it's one step at a time. So I know I've had students go, I just want to make change, and I want to do something big. And I say, every day, even something little leads to something big. So just trying to guide students has been a major important role in my life lately. I think I've always done mentorship, but it's a little bit different when we're talking about what's going on with Black lives, melanated lives. So.
Yeah, for me, I think it's probably been more of a more recent journey. And when the murder of George Floyd happened, and there was such a national response, which I thought was wonderful in many ways. I think partially because of the fact that we were under the pandemic, people suddenly had the bandwidth to consider some things that they maybe hadn't considered in the past. And when I thought about my own reaction to this, and the fact that there were a lot of marches and protests going on, I thought, well, in my own household we have some conditions that make it not so great for us to be out in the streets marching with other people during a pandemic. And so I thought very long and hard about what my personal response to this would be. And that's when I put together, the first time I've ever done this, a multi-track video to sort of commemorate everything that's going on, and to sort of also commemorate, the release was on the anniversary of the lynching of Emmett Till. So for me, this was my sort of first exploration into expressing some of these things in terms of what I do as an artist and as a performer. But the response was so strong that I'm aiming to try to continue in that direction. And as far as, and I really love hearing you talk about the ways in which we sort of connect these ideas with our students. And for me, once again, it hasn't been something that's necessarily been in the foreground of my work with my students, but one of the things that I'm doing now, for example, is I've got a current project where each of my students is being required to arrange and perform a piece that is far away from their own culture as they can get. And it's generated some really interesting conversations. The students have been really excited about these ideas, and I'm hoping that I can continue to think of ways to sort of bring these ideas to my teaching.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that you talk about George Floyd and its effect on you. I think that, I too was like, oh, there was Emmett Till. Why is this new information for people? Except that it's visually broadcast in a way where before it was circulating within the Black communities about what had happened to Emmett Till, right? But the situation was not any different from what has been ongoing. I think that my personal response, because it was during the pandemic, was to write stories that were unabashedly Black, and not just stories of pain and suffering, but stories of empowerment, because I did feel that students of color, who are our students, who were seeing this for the first time in a public way, I think it affected our students in a very different way, because whereas I teach and study African American drama history, this is like always what people have been writing about and singing about. It wasn't anything new, but for our students, it was something new. And I thought that they needed the support of being able to have people who could talk about how this builds on different histories and also help them to understand the many facets of protest that Tony has already spoken about.
Yeah, one of the works I completed this summer was called Justice in Motion. And I had a personal experience with a family member that was brutally attacked by the police. And, it was very, very scary. It happened in Washtenaw County, and it was actually while people were already on the front line, protesting. And I think my reaction, the first time I woke up to the video at 2 a.m., I just kind of broke down and I couldn't complete the video. I wasn't even sure, if at that point my family member had survived. It was just very difficult. And since then, throughout the summer and into the fall, I was on the front lines every day. But I also had a friend who came to me and said, I am African American melanated, and I haven't had this personal experience, but maybe connected to obviously people who have experienced this thing, but I would really like to articulate what I'm feeling right now and what I'm going through. I have mixed emotions. I don't know how to express myself, but as an artist, so I want to make a video. I want to do something. So I said, okay, I will direct, a short video. And so that's where Justice in Motion came along. And so it brings together, a cinematographer, an editor, Gianluca Petrassi, and it brought together a beatboxer, a lyricist, a composer, dancers from all over Michigan. We came together with this idea to do a healing project. So same as Anita, I didn't want to just express, the hardships of being melanated in America, but also the power in coming together for advocacy and, healing and allyship. So, and then I also wanted to celebrate the history of hip hop, because, the Black struggle and the desire and the passion and the fire to overcome, that's what started hip hop. And even leading into how I teach, that's how I teach. We talk about how it gets started. We talk about the Black Panther movement. We talk about what was happening in the Bronx in the 70s when it was burning, things like that led up to, these crews, breaking crews, these hip hop crews, and these voices and this influence that is all around us today. The influence of, the hip hop culture is just in everything that we do. And I wanted, I still want my students to know that, hey, this fight, like Anita said, it's not new. It's something that's always been there. And, if you love hip hop, I want you to have that foundation, of learning about how our people have overcome and how they share their voices and why it's so influential right now, even on these apps called TikTok, Instagram, things like that. So, yeah, so I think that was how I've been processing what has happened with George Floyd. I honestly, it's been almost a year, and I still can't bring myself to watch the entire thing. I can't. I'm tired of seeing it. I mean, as many people are. And I just, the only word that I've said a lot this year is humanity. We're not talking about side, Democratic or Republican. We're talking about humanity, and that needs to be first. And to me, it's plain and simple, but it's not, and it hasn't been for people to even grasp that concept. And, you know, I just feel like it's inexcusable when we're talking about human rights. It should be something that everybody is together on. And obviously, it's way more complicated than that. But we have those discussions in my class, and I think that that is how I've been, you know, trying to move forward and just influencing my students in this hip hop history course to just think. You know, maybe I'm not talking about you siding with me. You know, everybody's different on what they believe in their backgrounds, and there's a lot of things that play into that. But I want my students to walk away with the full knowledge of hip hop history and the overcoming of the struggle, you know, but I also want them to go speak and do more research, like I said earlier, about the experience of melanated African American people in this country. And I'm not just talking about, you know, I'm talking about asking questions and also dialoguing with people that don't maybe look like them or have the same experience, but also documentaries and films. And I mean, there's so much rich content out there. Sometimes I think, even though it's not hidden, it feels that way. But these are ways that I felt like I've been trying to heal from the experience and share and move on, but also impact the next generation, especially my students.
So I think I focus much more on healing, health, and well-being within African-American communities. Because for me, the George Floyd moment was a blip in time. I mean, it happens again and again, and I'm wondering how people will be able to sustain and continue to work under these circumstances. And I think that historically, it's always been by people coming together within the African-American communities and creating art form that suits and speaks to the African-American communities themselves. And so we formed a pod, a COVID pod called COVID Black. And that's because one of our students came to my door in the middle of the pandemic and knocked and said, "I'm just here." I was like, "What do you mean you're just here? This is the pandemic." And they were like, "I just need to talk to someone." And so I invited them in and they became a pod. So I have a pod of Black performers who come over and we just are able to use our art forms performing. We call it breathing Black stories because we have to start by breathing together in order to make a difference in the world. And so I think that that's where I have taken it. And I'm more interested now in thinking about how to create ways, institutions, methodologies for maintaining the health and well-being of Black communities, because as we've seen, George Floyd was in July and now we're in January, and nothing is stopped or changed. I think what has stopped or changed is that white people have become much more aware of racism and they're educating themselves about it, and that's good. And I think that there's one part of the advocacy and social activism that can be involved in educating the white population about African Americans. But I also think that it's important for me at this point in my life to also think about how I'm going to work with communities of color around self-activation and wellness.
That's great. You know, I feel like we kind of have an opportunity right now, and although I think that the attentions of Americans are a little bit fickle, that's the pessimist in me. I feel like you know, what has been brought to light this summer has caused conversations, even conversations like the one we're having now, to happen that may not have happened in the past, between people that may not have conversed in the past. And so what I think about a lot now are ways in which we can sort of take advantage of this moment, and at least in the field that I work in terms of what kind of composers are being performed, what kind of works are being performed, and at least in sort of in the classical music circles that I'm involved in, and how can we make some of these changes less about what happens in the month of February and more about what happens every day in everyday programming, you know, and the fact that you know, in my world, the majority of the major symphony orchestras during the month of February is when they oftentimes will program music by Black composers, and so now we have an opportunity, I think, to make some of these changes more permanent and less other. And that's, I think that's kind of what I'm interested in exploring going forward, are the ways that we can sort of like, now that people have had the bandwidth to actually listen to some of the things, as both of you have mentioned, that are not new, have been going on for a very long time, but people are sort of listening in a way now that maybe they haven't listened in the past. How can we take advantage of that? So I would love to explore more of that.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think going forward, one of my goals too is to really continue to be aware and just develop a sense of, like what you said, David, is just this is an opportunity for us to not think about what melanatedness is or blackness is in a box, and accept just anything and say, okay, you know, we're a part of this organization, or we're a part of this event in February on during Black History Month, but how can we be advocates for making sure that things can expand beyond that, you know, fighting for it, whether it's fighting for, you know, true history in the school systems, true Black history in the school system, beyond those 3 to 4 people that they teach about, you know, and beyond it being in February, you know, however, advocating for that, I think that's really important. So I really desire to continue to do more work in that way, and to not just accept what's comfortable and complacent and saying, okay, they're giving us this space for 1 second, but, you know, we deserve this space every day, you know? So I think that has been an important part of what I would like to do and contribute to, with contributing to the experience, the African-American experience. So, yeah.
Within the field of theater, there's big changes going on. I think that there's a big potential happening in terms of leadership of institutions. I see a lot of people moving into leadership roles. First of all, the institution is making a way for people to move into leadership roles in terms of running theaters and arts organizations. I think that will and can have an impact on the kind of programming that people do in the professional theater world, in the professional arts world. I see it happening in places like Opera America. I am a little challenged because I do think that it's a different challenge for people of color to change an institution that already exists, because then you have like a sole person trying to make the institution change, and it's not going to, right? I have more faith for the support and evolution of institutions that have already been run and managed by people of color and that have sustained themselves often for decades without adequate funding. But I think that both of those trends going on could possibly change the social consciousness in a way where artists really are able to survive by doing their work and telling the stories that are not mainstream stories, because that's the challenge.
So Anita, the space that, you know, you feel like you're in with the challenge of change, what do you think the next steps are, being in a space where you feel like, you know, maybe it's easier to make change in a space where there's more success in that and it's advocated for in a way, and then being in a space that's not necessarily supportive of that? Or
so as a dean in SMTD, I've been advocating by creating coalition groups. I think that the struggle for racial justice has to happen when people come together who have a similar shared things. I mean, you may know we recently had a faculty training where everyone took anti-racist training in the entire school, but the projects will really move forward for people who feel the passion, the concern, the desire to make those things happen. So all of this is about working within a primarily white institution to try to have people understand the need for diversity and inclusion, more inclusion than diversity. Because I think institutions already understand inclusion, at least in word speak, but to actually have, they understand diversity in terms of word speak, but in order to have inclusion, there needs to be structural changes. And I do feel that SMTD is moving towards that as people form advocacy coalitions at the faculty level, because that is my job, is to work with the faculty and faculty affairs to try to bring consciousness. So we've been having groups. I last saw David, we had a faculty of color group, haven't had that in a while. And then we had a women's leadership group, which is also making, and then there's a race strategic DEI, racial initiative. It's like all these subgroups, which at first it seems as if it's fractured action, but I think the fractured action is actually influencing smaller circles of people who then, when they do come together, will be able to move toward positive change. So my own interest right now is also in how can I actually work with the communities who are affected by racism? And that's a different project, right? How do we actually mobilize resources and infrastructures and policies to be able to affect people who are impacted and have their own. I work a lot around the world with global communities. So I work in South Africa, and I work in Ethiopia, and I work in the Caribbean, and I work with Native American communities. And I think the biggest, being paternal is not supportive. Like, each of the communities already have strategies that they're doing to affect change. And they've been doing them a long time, and they understand their own social networks, and they understand how to enact change. So an outsider coming in can only assist maybe with money, and there's ways in which you can assist without dictating the conversation. And I think that I'm interested in making sure that that kind of advocacy can happen for organizations that are already self-empowered to pursue their own betterment.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. I feel like we're really lucky to have Anita in the position that she's in right now, and very, very fortunate. And when I think about some of my own experiences as a student in SMTD in the early 80s, I did my undergraduate here. I think about the fact that one of the things that really helped me through some difficult times, but some wonderful times also, was that there was always a sense of community, and back then we had a wonderful person by the name of Willis Patterson, which I'm sure Anita knows. I don't know if you had the pleasure of meeting Willis Patterson, Tony. And he kept us all kind of glued together as students, which is great. And it sounds like Anita's doing some similar things for our students now. But when I look at where we are now, it's challenging because as SMTD, we're off in different directions, in some ways kind of siloed in the fact that I'm meeting Tony for the first time, for example, and Anita and I have certainly had the privilege of serving on committees together. I think we served on the scholarship committee for at least 3 years. The research committee for at least 3 years.
Yes.
There are people that I just don't see. I don't have an opportunity to meet. So I guess I would be interested moving forward. And I brought this up in our meeting with the students of I think that a lot of these changes and a lot of this dialogue can continue if there's a sense of community within the school. So I would love to hear any ideas on fostering that and continuing that moving forward. I think it's certainly important for the students. I think it would be helpful for the students if it also existed on the faculty.
Yeah, that's great. I think that and figuring out different ways to come together. Anita, I just admire everything that you're doing, and I really appreciate it. And it's just so needed, especially with within the schools. And I just appreciate that work, and I'm so honored to hear about it. And I can't wait to see the healing work that comes from it. And I think that with the students too, I'm really interested in making sure that the healing work is done with the students as far as our African American melanated students. I really want to make sure that they feel that their voices are heard as well, and they feel supported in the way that they want to discover who they are through this, and how they can be advocates, and how they can be activists, or how they can just do healing work So I think it might be interesting to have some communication or more groups like, Anita, what you said, the healing work that you're doing, where kids are coming in and with the COVID pandemic, just saying like, I need someone to talk to. And that is very, very real. And it is the same situation when we're talking about racism and discrimination. So I hope that there are more groups for students and more dialogue back and forth with students so that they feel that they have a voice, and not just feel that they have a voice, but actually have a voice in making change in the school and where we are right now.
So a lot is going on with the students. One of the things that's really interesting is that about 4 years ago in the theater department, the Black students came to my house for dinner. I said, y'all, let's just get together for dinner. So they came over, they brought their food, it was potluck. And then the next year, a student came up and he said, hey, are we going to have that dinner? I was like, what are you talking about? It's like, the dinner where everyone came over to your house? And I'm like, well, I guess. I don't know who to invite. And they were like, we'll take care of it, we'll invite it. So next time it was like, so first it was like 6 students. And the next time was like 15 students, and that was pretty good. Then the next year, they did the same thing, and it was really funny because they did potluck, and it was like 30 students, and 6 of them all brought roast chickens. It was like, this was the meal, roast chickens and chips, right? And so they all came over with their roast chicken and chips. And then this year, after George Floyd, it seemed as if they couldn't have it, but they still were like, we're going to have it. What are we going to do? And I said, well, let's go out and have like a potluck still, but we'll have it outside. So we went outside, and they were they came with masks, and they came with, this time I made hot dogs individually wrapped so that they wouldn't have to touch each other's meals. So, and then they brought little bags of potato chips. So we passed out the hot dogs and potato chips. But usually it's like a sitting around, like kvetching about this is wrong at the school and that's wrong at the school. This year, all they did was line dance. They went out outside, they did line dances. They brought a rolling speaker and they set it up and they did line dances. They did Latino line dances. They did African-American line dances. I've never seen so many line dances. They did all these line dances on the field, and it was wonderful because that's what they needed post George Floyd. They didn't want to sit and talk about the school. They didn't want to talk about George Floyd, God forbid. They just wanted to dance together. In the COVID time, like socially distanced, because line dancing is socially distanced. They did socially distanced line dances for a long time, and it was so beautiful to watch them out there. I have pictures of the event.
I definitely want to see that. Yeah, I definitely want to see that. I know lion dancing happens in my house all the time. Like that is a part of our we're Stevie Wonder, Eyes Don't Cry, and then everything else. So I think that's so beautiful to see that. And I hope that I can be a part of that at some point when it, comes around again, and maybe even bigger, invite some dancers.
Yeah, it was awesome.
I think that is a beautiful experience. Yeah, just having that and just allowing the conversation to lead wherever. And if it's no conversation and it's silence, or if it's just to eat, or if it's just a line dance, I think that's a part of the healing work, and it's beautiful.
The other thing that we talked about at the faculty workshop that I would like to see happen is SMTD, is that the students of color don't ever get a chance to work with the students of faculty, like in a way, like on a project. So we talked about having a 2, 3, 5-day retreat at some point, maybe in the beginning of the semester, with just students and faculty of color could get together and do stuff. Like whether it's line dancing or whether it's like getting a lecture, because we never take from each other. I mean, like I don't get to study with David, like anything, like that kind of, and there is a collective of people of color in SMTD who would really do well to get together and just do art. Because we all came to SMTD to do art, and we never get to do art together. I mean, yes, there was like, when Daniel Washington was an associate dean, there was like Martin Luther King celebration. But I don't think it should be that. It should really be about exchanging ideas and artistry and plans for the future, and just having a chance. I've just really realized since George Floyd, the impact of affinity groups getting together and just talking to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that all these things are less transitory and less about the moment and more permanent. And I think that they kind of help us to look to the future. And I would love to come to your potluck and invite people from my own department. You know, we're all so separated. So you're telling me this, and I'm so envious, because I think, wow, this would be fantastic if we got several of the faculty together, and I'd be happy to help host. And maybe we need a bigger park, but let's do it.
And it's on the students too, because the word spread. Like, honestly, what was beautiful about it was people showed up I'd never met. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so glad you're here. It wasn't like me knowing them. The students advocated, and they were like, yo, you got to come and do this. This will help you so much when you're here. More like that.
That's beautiful.
And yes, across disciplines.
Absolutely.
Yes.
That's the,
Yes.
I love that.
Well, I'll definitely be in contact with you about that. And I
Likewise.
will not bring chicken and chips, although I love chips. I will bring something else than chicken and chips. But also, I think having that artist exchange, I think is really beautiful too. Just being in the space, learning from each other, seeing each other, and just sharing the space together, I think is also healing. And I would love to do that as well. Anita, you have some amazing ideas and things that you're doing. So it makes me really motivated, inspired for change. And I would love to be a part of these things.
These all sound so wonderful, you know, and I think about this on several different levels, and what Anita is talking about is fantastic. And also, maybe I know that the last meeting that we hosted with the students, there was a lot of talk of the possibility of students sort of putting together their own programs that might be sort of focused on some of their own interests, students of color in particular. And I love the idea of faculty working with the students, but I also love the idea of faculty working with each other.
Yes.
And collaborating. So I think about, you know, I'm seeing theater, I'm seeing dance, I'm seeing what I do. My current project right now is I've got a piece by a black composer, Adolphus Hailstork, called John Henry, that was written for me. And you know, John Henry sort of represents a lot of different things, including, you know, man's struggle against sort of the machines coming in and taking over our lives, but also maybe a black person's struggle against racism. And so I'm putting that piece together with a dancer. And it's not intended to be done with a dancer. And I think about all the possibilities in our own buildings, soon to be building, I hope, where dance is concerned. And there's got to be some ways that we can collaborate. You know, I look at the fact that we have these series. There's like, in the past, pre-pandemic, there's a faculty chamber music series that happens one Sunday out of each month. I don't see why we couldn't have occasionally, at least we could fill 3 concerts in a year of interesting projects that the faculty actually working together and collaborating, and you know, we'd fill a hall easily, and probably do some really interesting projects together. So we should find a way to make that happen.
I think that would be excellent.
That would be amazing. I'm excited. And I definitely think collaborating in that way would be so beneficial to not only if the students were collaborating with, but the faculty, and also getting just to have, like Anita was saying, that sense of community, and continuing something that's meant to not just be emphasized for a moment, but just beyond that, and continuing to see something that is healing, but also growth. So I would be interested to see how over the years the line dance party grows.
Right, exactly.
Into like a banquet, and you know, something very, very huge. And also the performances. You know, I really have wanted to work choreographically and film-wise with a lot of the students and other faculty as well, and also just share hip hop in the academic and institution setting. I know Rennie Harris was one of the first to really do that and emphasize that, but I would like to see more of it, on stage, and what it means to art, music and dance as well. So I would be very excited and very honored to work with both of you. And I can't wait.
Likewise.
I'm saying it as it's going to happen. I am so excited to work with both of you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we'll see what happens, and I'm really grateful for this conversation.
Likewise.
Thank you, everybody.
Likewise, yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.